how Trump's America First vision puts Make in India and millions of livelihoods on the line.
2 decades ago, Jinal Abidin left his family and moved to India's capital, where he spent a year learning Zardozi, an ancient and intricate threadwork technique he hoped would equip him to support his family for decades to come. The gamble succeeded. He landed a job at Orient Craft, a major garment factory on the outskirts of New Delhi that supplies global brands like Gap, Ralph Lauren, and American Eagle. For 12 years, he has created pieces destined for clothing racks 8,000 miles away in the United States. "This is a true skill," he said, recalling that year spent learning his craft when he lived on his meager savings as his needle moved across a sheer piece of fabric to form a flower petal. Otherwise, it would not take a year to learn. Now, that hard-won livelihood is threatened by a force beyond his control. On Wednesday, the White House imposed 50% tariffs on Indian goods, some of the highest the U.S. has imposed on any of its trade partners in what is already a historic global trade war, threatening to decimate business that depends on Indian exports like textiles, diamonds, steel, and automobiles. Half of the 50% levies are Donald Trump's punishment for India's ramped-up purchases of Russian oil following Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. The other half are part of Trump's signature American First campaign to reduce U.S. trade deficits, in the case with India, $45.7 billion in 2024. Both are clashing with the Make in India dream of fellow populist Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who envisions turning his country into a manufacturing powerhouse to power economic growth and lift millions out of poverty. As India's biggest export market, the U.S. is, or at least was, a big part of that dream. On the floor of Orient Craft, which exports about 82% of its products to the U.S., gloom is settling in. "It has caused a lot of difficulties, and the company is in trouble," Abidin said. "If the company is in trouble, we are in trouble. If the country is in trouble, we are in trouble. It's a problem Modi can't afford, with tens of millions of young people already struggling to enter the job market in the world's fastest-growing major economy. Worse than COVID." Neeraj Pandey has been at the factory for 22 years. But the new tariffs threaten to unravel his life. "We could lose everything," he said. "Our employment will be gone." For Sumitra Devi, working at Orient Crafts factory in the neighboring state of Jharkhand was more than a job. "Women from my village don't usually work. I was a housewife," she said. Her factory earnings changed everything. She put her children through private school, and now her elder daughter dreams of becoming an engineer. For Devi, a school dropout, this is a matter of pride. Now, she fears that new tariffs could erase it all. "My husband's salary isn't enough," she said. "If I lose my job, the girls will have to go back to a government school, and my daughters are so proud. They say, 'Look, my mother works.'" Pandey and Devi's stories cut to the heart of a grand national ambition, Modi's Make in India, a strategy built on making goods domestically to sell to the world. Launched in 2014, this flagship program is central to the Indian leader's political brand, built on promises of national pride and future greatness for the nation of 1.4 billion. The government has poured more than $26 billion into incentives for sectors like apparel to reduce India's reliance on imports and create a manufacturing powerhouse. While there have been shortfalls, manufacturing's share of GDP is stalled at 17%. It has undeniably elevated India on the world stage, offering a real alternative to China for some investors and consumer brands. Orient Craft's owner, Sudhir Dhingra, called this period very challenging. "Some orders from American buyers have already been put on hold," he said. Hemant Makhija, who heads the fabrics department at Orient Craft, estimates some 20 million workers at cotton mills across India could be out of a job. Mills across the national capital region are already operating at 50% capacity despite this being peak season, he said. Ajay Srivastava, a former trade official who runs New Delhi's Global Trade Research Initiative, predicts the levies will hit export hubs hard, with U.S. orders worth $5.4 billion likely to plummet by 60% to 90%. For Dhingra, the human cost is the most alarming part. It's very painful to sustain their families, he said. This is worse than COVID. A need to diversify. The western city of Surat is the epicenter of the global diamond industry, a massive processing hub where skilled artisans handle about 90% of the world's rough diamonds, polishing them to make them ready for the global market. The sector, which employs about 5 million people nationwide, contributes about 7% of the country's GDP, according to the India Brand Equity Foundation. The U.S. remains highly dependent on Indian diamonds, said Jayantibai Savalia, regional chairman of the Gem and Jewelry Export Promotion Council in India. Any slowdown will have a 100% impact, potentially leading to job losses and salary cuts. While recent shipments provide a temporary buffer, he expects exports to decline significantly over the next 8 months, calling the situation a wake-up call for the industry to diversify its markets. Under his turbocharged America First foreign policy, Trump has prioritized his own national interests, economic self-sufficiency, and sovereignty, much like Modi, his nationalist counterpart in New Delhi. The position seeks to reshore manufacturing to the U.S., but in doing so, it could sacrifice Washington's long-standing courtship of New Delhi as a vital counterweight to China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific region. The primary source of friction is the U.S. trade deficit with India, which has widened significantly over the last decade, even as bilateral trade has roughly doubled. The U.S. was India's largest trade partner as of 2024, yet India ranked 10th in the list of U.S. trading partners for the same year. The bilateral trade between the U.S. and the world's most populous nation was $129.2 billion in 2024, a record for the partnership. The high levies could effectively erase India from the U.S. in some key markets, like garments, Srivastava from the Global Trade Research Initiative said. It makes Indian garments uncompetitive against Vietnam's 20% and China's 42%, he added, leaving little chance to retain U.S. buyers. Still, he noted, while tariffs will hurt export-heavy sectors like apparel, textiles, jewelry, and seafood, these form about 20% of India's GDP, with U.S. exports counting for a fifth of that. Strong domestic demand, 6-7% growth, and ongoing reforms will cushion the impact, preventing a systemic crisis, Srivastava said, adding, India may face short-term pain, but its vast domestic market will cushion the blow, enabling a quick rebound. The anxiety has nevertheless made Dhingra from Orient Craft begin to think of alternatives. Russia is an unexplored market. I would say parts of Europe, we could grab business there. We could also go to South America, which we have not done, he said.
But my worry is that it will leave a very deep scar in the Indo-American relationship, Modi not backing down.
While many nations have rushed to strike trade deals with Trump to lower tariffs, Modi has been less willing to cave. New Delhi called the tariffs unfair and unjustified, pointing out the hypocrisy of Trump's move, noting that the U.S. and Europe still buy Russian fertilizers and chemicals. Earlier this month, Modi said, India will never compromise on the interests of farmers, fishermen, and dairy farmers. I know personally I will have to pay a heavy price for it, but I am ready for it, he added. To mitigate the impact, the government has announced some countermeasures, including suspending import duties on raw materials and accelerating trade talks to diversify export markets. But for regular factory workers, this means little.
If my job goes away, I have no other work. I don't know how to do anything else, Pandey said. If they can come to a compromise, that would be better. If not, what can we do?
India has walked away from U.S. trade talks due to tariffs, ex-top official.
On the question of strained U.S.-India trade ties, former Finance Secretary Subhash Garg said New Delhi has already effectively walked away from talks, given Trump's unilateral tariffs of up to 50%. Former Finance Secretary Subhash Garg has hit out at U.S. President Donald Trump's repeated claims that India is profiteering massively from discounted Russian oil, calling the charge political theater, not economic reality. Speaking to NDTV, Mr. Garg said, a new CLSA report has already debunked the windfall narrative, showing India's actual savings from Russian crude are closer to $2.5 billion annually, not $25 billion. You can put any number. It makes no difference. Trump is using this as a sword to punish India, Mr. Garg said. Profiteering claims just a tool to punish India. According to Mr. Garg, the true effective discount India enjoys on Russian barrels is now just $3 to $4 per barrel, once shipping, insurance, and blending costs are factored in. If Trump wants to use it as a political tool, he can pick any figure. The reality is, India is buying Russian oil well within the global price cap framework. There's no violation of any international agreement, he stressed. Mr. Garg also warned that backing off Russian crude purchases would be counterproductive. Any reduction in crude costs is worth it for India. Walking away would only embolden the U.S., not serve India's interest. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had said that high tariffs on India are not just over India's purchase of Russian oil, but also due to the protracted nature of the ongoing trade deal talks. India-U.S. trade talks effectively walked away. On the question of strained U.S.-India trade ties, Mr. Garg said New Delhi has already effectively walked away from talks, given Trump's unilateral tariffs of up to 50%. No one can trade at those tariff levels, but India should never formally close the door. One must always hope sanity prevails at some point. At the same time, Mr. Garg urged India to rethink its own rigid negotiating positions, particularly in agriculture and consumer goods. We've been too inflexible on things like GM oils or dairy. Farmers' interests are not really hurt by these imports. It's about consumer preference, and that should come with a choice, not bans. India has asserted that it is prepared to stand firm against U.S. pressure, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi vowing he would never compromise the interests of the country's farmers. Modi-Xi meeting. India must rethink China strategy. Ahead of PM Modi's scheduled meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Tianjin this weekend, Mr. Garg said India's long-standing approach of blocking Chinese investment in critical sectors has backfired. We can't do without importing semiconductors, solar cells, EV batteries from China. Allowing Chinese investment in India could actually reduce dependence in the long run. Our current policy has hurt us. Boycott calls are insane. On rising calls to boycott U.S. goods in retaliation to Trump's tariffs, Mr. Garg was blunt. It's insane. The U.S. is deeply integrated into Indian consumption and services. A boycott is neither possible nor desirable. What tariffs has Trump announced and why? Since returning to office in January, U.S. President Donald Trump has introduced a sweeping global program of tariffs and threatened many more. Imports from countries with which Trump has political grievances are subject to particularly high rates. Goods from other countries who have agreed trade deals face lower duties. Trump argues that the tariffs boost American manufacturing and protect jobs, but the volatility of his trade policy has thrown the world economy into chaos, and a number of firms have increased prices for U.S. consumers as a result. What are tariffs and how do they work? Tariffs are taxes charged on goods bought from other countries. Typically, they are a percentage of a product's value. A 10% tariff means a $10 product has a $1 tax on top, taking the total cost to the importer of $11. Companies that bring foreign goods into the U.S. have to pay the tax to the government. They may pass some or all of the extra cost on to customers. Firms may also decide to import fewer goods. At the end of May, a U.S. trade court ruled that Trump did not have the authority to impose some of the tariffs he has announced because he did so under national emergency powers. But the following day, an appeals court said the relevant taxes could stay in place while the case continued. Why is Trump using tariffs? Trump says tariffs will encourage U.S. consumers to buy more American-made goods, increase the amount of tax raised, and boost investment. He wants to reduce the gap between the value of goods the U.S. buys from other countries and those it sells to them, known as the trade deficit. He argues that America has been taken advantage of by cheaters and pillaged by foreigners. The president has announced different tariffs against specific goods and imports from individual countries. Many of these have been subsequently amended, delayed, or canceled altogether. Critics accuse Trump of making dramatic and sometimes contradictory policy statements as a negotiating tactic to encourage trade partners to agree deals that benefit the U.S. Trump has made other demands alongside the tariffs. Setting out the first tariffs of his current term against China, Mexico, and Canada, he said all three countries must do more to stop migrants and illegal drugs reaching the U.S. Separately, on 14 July, Trump threatened to introduce significant tariffs against companies trading with Russia if a deal to end the war in Ukraine was not reached within 50 days. Which tariffs has the U.S. put in place on specific goods? The taxes on goods imported to the U.S. include 50% tariff on steel and aluminum imports, 50% tariff on copper imports, 25% tariff on foreign-made cars and imported engines and other car parts. On 8 July, Trump threatened to impose a 200% tariff on pharmaceutical imports, but no further details have been confirmed. Trump has also said the global tariff exemption covering goods valued at $800 or less will end on 29 August. He had already removed the so-called de minimis exemption for products from China and Hong Kong to restrict Americans' purchase of cheap clothes and household items from commerce sites like Shein and Temu. It means that while gifts worth less than $100 will remain duty-free, all other packages will face the same tariff rate as other goods from their country of origin. Some international postal services, including Royal Mail and Germany's DHL, said they would temporarily suspend parcel deliveries to the U.S. while they clarify how the new rules will work in practice. Which tariffs has the U.S. put in place against individual countries? A patchwork of different rates is now in effect. Many of these stem from an announcement on 2 April, when Trump said a baseline tariff of 10% would apply to all other imports from all countries. The U.S. president said goods from about 60 other trade partners, which the White House described as the worst offenders, would face higher rates as payback for unfair trade policies. These reciprocal tariffs were later postponed for 90 days to allow time to negotiate individual trade deals. The deadline was then extended until 1 August and then to 7 August. Tariff rates that are now in effect include 50% tariffs on Indian goods, 50% tariffs on Brazilian goods, 30% tariffs on South African goods, 20% tariffs on Vietnamese goods, 19% tariffs on Indonesian goods, 19% tariffs on Filipino goods, 15% tariffs on Japanese goods,
15% tariffs on South Korean goods. The European Union managed to strike a deal with the U.S. during Trump's window for negotiations. In late July, the two sides agreed that European goods would face 15% tariffs, including cars. Under the deal, which needs to be approved by all 27 EU members, the trading bloc will charge U.S. firms 0% duty on certain products. Some of the first tariffs that were announced during Trump's second presidency targeted China, Canada, and Mexico. These were later amended, increased, or postponed. A 35% tariff will also apply to all Canadian goods on top of existing duties. This excludes products covered by the existing North American Free Trade Agreement between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. However, Trump has delayed imposing higher tariffs on all Mexican goods for another 90 days to strike a deal. Earlier, Trump had threatened 30% or a higher rate to match any retaliatory duties introduced on U.S. imports. U.S.-Chinese trade negotiations are ongoing. The two countries had raised tariffs on each other's goods to more than 100% before temporarily lowering rates for a 90-day period. That pause, which was set to end on 12 August, was extended for another 90 days to 10 November. What have the UK and US agreed on tariffs? At 10%, the UK has negotiated the lowest US tariff rate so far. The UK exported about £58 billion of goods to the US in 2024, mainly cars, machinery, and pharmaceuticals. The 10% rate applies to the first 100,000 UK vehicles exported to the US every year, which is roughly the number of cars sold in 2024. Each vehicle above the quota would face the standard 25% car tariff. The agreement also lets the two countries sell beef to each other, although the government insists there will be no change to the UK's higher food safety standards. Some US ethanol will face 0% tariffs, compared to the previous rate of 19%. The two countries agreed an initial framework in May. Trump announced the deal was done at the G7 summit in Canada in June. However, he did not confirm the expected removal of charges on steel imports from the UK, which was outlined in May. Although the UK is the only country which does not have to pay 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum, a 25% tariff remains. How has the global economy responded to Trump's tariffs? Trump's various announcements have caused volatility on global stock markets, where firms sell shares in their business. However, markets have recently been more stable. Many people are affected by stock market price changes, even if they don't invest in shares directly, because of the knock-on effect on pensions, jobs, and interest rates. The value of the US dollar, usually considered a safe asset, has also fallen sharply at times. The International Monetary Fund and the influential Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development both downgraded their predictions for global economic growth in 2025 as a result of the tariffs. Both organizations expect the U.S. economy to be badly affected. The latest figures show the U.S. economy grew at an annual rate of 3% between April and June 2025, after shrinking in the first 3 months of the year. The president insists his trade policy is working, but influential voices within his own Republican Party have joined opposition Democrats and foreign leaders in attacking the measures. Are prices going up for U.S. consumers? Analysts say tariffs are already feeding into the overall U.S. inflation rate as businesses pass on some or all of their higher costs. Adidas has confirmed it will raise prices for American customers as a result of the tariffs. Almost half of the company's products are made in Vietnam and Indonesia, which are facing levies of 20% and 19% respectively. Nike has also said U.S. prices will increase, warning the tariffs could add $1 billion to its costs. Barbie maker Mattel also plans to charge more in the U.S.
some companies are choosing to import fewer foreign goods, which can make those which are available more expensive.
The costs of goods manufactured in the U.S. using imported components are also expected to rise. For example, car parts typically cross the U.S., Mexican, and Canadian borders multiple times before a vehicle is completely assembled. The new tariffs have also resulted in tighter customs checks at the U.S. border, leading to delays at the border.